Welcome, Cody Peterson. I'm delighted that you are willing to come here and talk about your new book, just published last fall, The Shadow of a Figure of Light. I devoured this, and it was incredibly meaningful to me as a therapist who works with alcoholics. The subtitle is The Archetype of the Alcoholic and the Journey to Enlightenment. Tell us just a couple of things about yourself, if you will.
I'm a construction worker by trade. I I have 11 years of being clean and sober. I've spent my whole life kind of surrounded by alcoholism and drug addiction, and I spent many years trying to get clean and sober myself, sort of going in and out of 12-step rooms, as they say. And I got sober finally in March of 2013. And in 2019, I was and maybe we can talk about this, but I think that was really the beginning of this book. I wrote a poem, and there was an interesting image that emerged through the poem, and then about a year later I was already writing. So by 2021, I had you know sort of formulated the concept of the archetype of the alcoholic, and was able to get the book published. Chiron published it, which I was really happy about. They're a reputable Jungian publishing house. I worked with Dr. Stephen Herman, so he mentored me a little bit, and I do write about that in the book. And yeah, so it's just been a tremendous journey, really, to write the book and to be able to talk about these ideas. I found so much meaning through the 12 steps, and then to really be able to look at the 12 steps through a Jungian lens has been a profound experience for me. So it really kind of illustrates, I think, the two systems, they go hand in hand. They share a lot of commonalities with their history and stuff. And so to look at transformation through the lens of like the 12 steps and Jungian psychology kind of mixed together provides a really kind of stark illustration of what's taking place in the process. So,
Well, it's brilliant. I appreciate the first part of the book, which is a kind of history of the intertwining of the formation of the 12-step movement and Jung beginning to develop his idea of the steps of individuation and how they were kind of on a parallel track. And yet, from time to time, there were connections. There were actual connections with people between Jung and Bill W. Famously, that letter where he talks about needing the support of fellow sufferers plus a connection with a spiritual aspect. And then the second half of the book is so wonderful because it really emphasizes that necessity for spiritual connection, really for all of us, but very much especially for folks dealing with addiction. But the twist is, which I thought was brilliant, is that the archetype, if you will, the pattern of the alcoholic is not standing in the way. It becomes the way. In other words, alcoholism, addiction, and other maladies are meant to knock the ego out or to bring it to its correct size, to understand the ego is not in control. Something else is. It's just brilliant. So, with your kind permission, may I read just a very brief passage that really, really struck me? One of many.
sure.
Comparing Jung's commentary on the trickster. The trickster is a well-known archetype found in every mythological system around the world through time. His commentary on the trickster to the archetype of the alcoholic helps illuminate the compulsive parts of the psyche that tend to remain hidden from the ego's view. Jung said of the trickster, it is half animal, half divine, which comes up in a minute in a dream we're going to talk about. Something that can also be said of the alcoholic archetype, considering just how savage its animalistic half can be. The alcoholic sets a deadly trap in alcoholics' lives meant to awaken them to an awareness of their intangible spiritual thirst, if it doesn't kill them first. That is profound. So thank you for this book. Thank you for the insights that you have brought to the world through this book. Just congratulations.
Thank you so much. It means so much to hear, people who aren't necessarily in the 12 steps, but who, especially people, like you work with addiction and alcoholism and stuff. So it is, one of the big sort of kind of goals that I had was to try to, so there's another book that's written about addiction by another Jungian, David Shane, The War of the Gods and Addiction. And I listened to that book and and read it and stuff, and he wrote a blurb for me, but what I noticed was that his perspective of the whole process was somewhat different than mine. And he speaks of alcoholism or addiction as an unintegratable evil, and that didn't quite sit right with me, right? Because what I find, see, and I don't know that you can actually really grasp this, like being outside of the complex of alcoholism, but that, and it's surprising because if you go to like an AA meeting, almost any AA meeting, at least one person, if not many old timers, right? People with long-term sobriety will say that they are grateful alcoholics. That's like a common phrase. And that's such a paradox, like who ever heard of a grateful alcoholic or a grateful drug addict? And so within the 12 steps, we're sort of living in this paradoxical space that is really difficult to explain. But what I found was that Carl Jung he has his fingers on that same kind of, understanding or whatever it is. So a lot of Jung's stuff just applies to the 12 steps, just almost like verbatim, like they can be equated, and which brings up a lot of questions about Jung himself. Like, how did he know so much? Like what sort of, history does he have? Was there alcoholism in his family? Like I haven't done that research, and I don't conjecture too much about that in the book. But what I do say is that Jung really speaks the language that we speak in the rooms, it's just it's maybe a little different, but, and so, yeah, back to the statement was that a big goal of mine was to try to portray to people just like you, like what it is that we're actually doing in the 12 steps, and just to kind of, and not to say you didn't understand, but a lot of therapists actually don't, it's sad, but it's like, they think that the 12 steps are for peer support and really nothing else. And while that's an important part of what we're doing, it's really kind of there's another really profound spiritual process taking place in the 12 steps too. That's very Jungian, Jungian sounding at least. So.
Yes. And I freely admit that to my addicted clients and my alcoholic clients, no matter where they are in the recovery process. I freely admit, look, I'm not experiencing what you are experiencing. I'm just not. That's why you go to an AA meeting and you find the right sponsor, because that's who understands completely what you're going through.
Yeah.
I can help you to an extent, and I want to. However, if you really want to talk to somebody who knows precisely and exactly what you're going through, you have to go find somebody else in recovery. So
Mm,
I agree with you completely, and willingly say that to the folks I work with.
that's
All
great.
right.
I mean, you're
Okay.
in good company, you know, because that's Jung did the same thing, and that's really was sort of the impetus for the creation of AA. You know, he told the
Yep.
billionaire Roland Hazard, I can't help you. You have to have a vital spiritual experience. And that was groundbreaking, you know, that when Jung said that, it was flying in the face of everything that psychologists were trying to do at the time. Really a
Yes.
slap in the face to psychoanalysis, you know, and just and it took a lot of courage for Jung to even say something like that, you know. And
Definitely.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, so our we, you know, and who, yeah, it's just it's, you know, we talk about in the 12 steps that this it was the system, the 12 steps and Alcoholics Anonymous and the other fellowships were really founded by a miracle that was taking place, you know, with only seconds and inches to spare. And
Yeah.
this is, you know, Jung's advice to Roland, or I call it his spiritual prescription, was certainly one of those moments that millions of lives hung in the balance.
So let's now turn to one of your dreams if you're ready.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to let you tell a dream and let's see what we might be able to do with it.
So I had sent you a couple, and you want to do the one with the dog and the lion, yeah?
Yes, that'll be
Okay.
great.
All right. So I'll just go ahead and read this. I have it written down here.
Okay.
So I have this dream a couple of weeks after the book, The Shadow of a Figure of Light, was released. So this was in early November. The book was released November 1st. And this was a few days after that. It says, at a family reunion, the owner of the house has a huge, muscular black pit bull and an equally large, powerful, and intimidating mountain lion as pets. When I sit down in a chair in the living room, the dog follows me and sits next to me. I pet the dog on its head, and the lion comes near us. Then the dog growls at the lion, and the lion hisses back. It is apparent that they are about to fight, so I move to another chair across the room. The dog follows me, and as I pet the dog again, the situation with the lion is repeated, more growling and hissing. I move again, and when the owner finally lets the two animals get into it, they fight briefly, but the lion quickly becomes docile and lies on its side. With its head flat on the carpeted floor, front and rear legs stretched out perfectly straight, the giant cat lies there, utterly submissive. Then the dog nudges the lion with its snout, hops around and dominates over it, and then starts humping the lion like a puppy. Suddenly, the lion morphs into a man standing next to me, a newcomer in AA, whom I congratulate for bringing the key element of willingness. I woke up to the well-known phrase from the book Alcoholics Anonymous in my mind: willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but of these, willingness is indispensable.
What a powerful dream with such powerful images. And so, my first question about this dream, or the first thing in the first few words, are family reunion. Was this your family? Were these people that you recognized?
So that's an interesting question, because I didn't recognize the man whose house it was.
The owner?
Yeah, the owner. And but so and I'm yeah, it just there was just the sense that this was a family reunion. So
Oh,
yeah, it would have been my family.
okay. Now, do you have any feeling about what would make this dream start this way? The setting of the dream is a family reunion.
So a lot of the dreams that I've been having recently, I sort of dream in plural.
Hmm.
It's very often a we situation. and this was kind of just a repeat of that. So, but this was a little more personal in the sense that it was like a family function. Typically, the dreams very more often it's just like I'm a lot of times in my dreams it's me and then a group and we're on tour. Like we're touring through like a museum or a warehouse or something. So I my connection to that would be that this that what's taking place here. So I think that this sort of pluralistic kind of perspective that I have in the dream world is almost just a reflection of the multiple sort of complexes that exist within the psyche, right? That Jung said that the ancient people in ancient indigenous people believed that the human being was sort of housed many souls, and 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 he said that there's evidence through modern empirical psychology that that is actually accurate. And so I think that this we complex, this we thing that I'm experiencing in my dreams is a reflection of that.
I think that sounds most reasonable. Did you recognize any particular person?
No, because there was nobody in the room except me and this other person, but he didn't even have there was he wasn't even necessarily in the room. I don't because I don't remember seeing the person whose dogs these were.
Mhm. Okay. So this family reunion, which is the complexes within, in other words, the dynamics within the psyche itself. And that is very interesting because I think about this as, if it's okay if I comment about
Hmm.
it, I think about this as we do carry around as our complexes, our family of origin. You
Hmm.
know, we carry around our mother complex and our father complex and our sibling complexes and everybody, grandma and grandpa and everybody else in there. And all of the ways in which our experiences with those folks and the emotions that go with those experiences have informed us, or now part of that interior dynamic aspect.
Sure.
What is so interesting, though, is the word reunion to me. And
Mm.
that, to me, it suggests, and I'll write what I think in a different color. It suggests, at least it hints at an integration. In my mind, the point of all of this business is, in fact, to integrate
Hmm.
parts of ourselves, and including and maybe especially the shadow parts, the darker parts, to understand that they are there. And so the motif of the reunion, or even the dinner party or the banquet or something like that, sometimes I refer to those as echoes of the heavenly banquet, echoes of that which in the fullness of time we will all be invited to the perfect wholeness and perfect reunion of our various aspects. I have
Hmm.
no idea if that rings with you, but that's what it reminds me of.
No, yeah, no, it does too. There, it does in this other sort of like really grand archetypal way, which is, and we can get into this a little later too. But the dream that sort of predated this one was of the moon as a jack-o'-lantern, and
Yes.
so and what I figured out was that was actually an eclipse, right? And so in Mysterium Conjunctionis, Jung talks about the conjunction of Sol and Luna, right? The sun and
Mhm.
the moon. And so
Yes.
this family reunion thing, and that's something that I hadn't really noticed. I didn't pay too much attention to the word reunion, but it's really interesting that it is a reunion. That's what's taking place in the dream
Yes.
between the dog and the lion. So
Yeah. All right. We're going to wait for that to refocus itself. I hope it will. Come on now. Come on, thing. Well, we will continue. you don't have an idea about who the owner was.
I think the owner, so I feel like the owner is probably, if I were to guess, that the owner would most likely signify the self.
And I'm gonna, that was my thought too. That was my absolute first thought, is that is the owner of the house, if you will, is the owner of the psyche. Isn't that the lesson that sobriety and recovery teaches, is that I'm not the owner of the house. This is the owner of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So, so say a little bit more about your definition, or what you imagine the self with a capital S is.
So I talk a lot about the self in my book, and it's just I have the Jungian perspective, but I think that the way I understand the self might be a little bit different than the typical Jungian would, in terms of that the self, it really houses the entire spectrum of the psychology. So there's Jung talks often about the highest and the lowest, and so the self really encompasses both. So in terms of like alcoholism, the self is the driving factor behind the practicing alcoholics sort of compulsion to drink, but then the self is also the higher power that allows a person sort of the ability to overcome drinking. So so through that filter, the self is really, I think it's a metaphor, I guess, for the unification of the psyche. It's kind of this broad, like, the whole person is the self, both the highest and the lowest. And the self includes the ego, right? But
Yeah.
it's also much bigger than the ego, in it's transcendent. So the ego can't really, the ego can only really make conjectures about what the self is, what the self does, because the self, it encompasses the collective unconscious.
So one of the terms that you just used a moment ago is unification of the psyche, which kind of goes back to your reunion there.
Mm-hmm.
So that is so interesting. And in doing dream work, it's interesting how the concept of both and comes up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That things in dreams mean this and that, not this or that. And
Yeah.
what you just said about the self, there's almost everything you said was a both and. It is the factor behind the compulsion, and it is that which enables recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So that is fascinating. So we hadn't even gotten to the end of the first sentence, and
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah, I love dreams for this. They're so rich.
Yeah. So we know then, I mean, if I mean, as best we can know, we know then that we are in a place which is calling for, participation in this integration, in this encounter, if you will, with the self, or acknowledgement might be a better term, that this is the house of the self. Okay, so next image that comes up is the dog. Tell me a little bit about this dog. I mean, you described him as huge, muscular. He's black. He's a pit bull. Kind of riff on that image for a few minutes.
My perspective of this, so, and the way I've gone about interpreting these dreams is to really rely heavily on Jung's Mysterium Connjunctionis. And the reason is, I don't know, once I was able to plug into that, it really opened up something. I came across a quote this morning. I thought I might read it during this. He says, we take our stand simply and solely on the facts, recognizing that the archetypal structure of the unconscious will produce over and over again, and irrespective of tradition, those figures which reappear in the history of all epochs and all peoples, and will endow them with the same significance and numinosity that have been theirs from the beginning. And so these images repeat over and over and over. And so what I found is that my dream images are highly correlated with the images that he explores in Canute. And so the dog is actually, which I was kind of surprised to learn this, but it really fit that the dog symbolism is highly correlated to the symbolism of the moon. And so Luna, and so Luna, again, if we go back to the moon as jack-o'-lantern, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this dream is a continuation of that dream. It almost is telling us more what's taking place as the moon appears as a jack-o'-lantern. That this, so the dog then is actually a female, and it's a representation of the anima. And so the dream series is really this kind of, it's really this projection of the anima, I guess. So there's a lot of really interesting parallels with the dog being black. So the first one is that typically, like, a black dog would represent the new moon, or the phase of the moon when the moon's dark, and that was always sort of an ominous time. There's a lot of symbolism wrapped up with the new moon, and actually like the regular, like a full moon too. So the moon was always thought to emit a harmful light. They, in ancient times, they would try to protect kids from direct contact with moonlight. And the moon was seen as a great poisonous mirror in the sky. And so the moon sort of, especially like from me, I'm a male, and my projection of the anima, like in the early projections would be sort of that the anima is not a very helpful, character, right? Like it's more of a projection of like darkness, evil, difficulty, strife, all of these things. So what's happening then with this dream is that the anima is actually, so Jung says, he quotes some alchemical text that says that Diana, or the goddess of the moon, becomes propitious, and she is able to slay wild beasts, or tame wild beasts. And so what I feel like is happening in this dream, and this is a long explanation, but is that the dog then is representative of this, that of the anima, but the anima has begun to shift in the psyche. It's becoming more of a helpful figure than a harmful one. So, if we go back to the highest and the lowest, kind of as the self or whatever, that that there's, the anima has begun to transition from sort of a dark lower power to sort of a higher, helpful power. It's becoming more integrated. So that's sort of how I see this. So what's taking place here then is when the dog dominates over the lion, what's being represented in my mind is that this is a symbol of a full eclipse, because the lion is a representation of the sun, or it could be the male aspect. It's definitely correlates with soul symbolism, the king of heaven. And so this dream, when the dog dominates over the lion and then humps it, it's definitely, the symbolism here is of an eclipse. And so it's really telling me what the image of the jack-o'-lantern was, right? The moon as jack-o'-lantern. The sun was actually inside of the moon. And so
Ah, uh-huh.
yeah, so the moon is now, instead of emitting a harmful white light, it's now emitting an orange red sort of helpful warm glow. So there's
Yeah,
the transition.
yeah. So, gosh, this is good. This is great stuff. May I make a couple of comments?
Yeah, please.
So, you know, in my reading and my understanding of dog as a um as an archetype, actually. Dog is an archetype in that human beings have experienced a relationship with dogs since almost the beginning of humanity. That dogs and humans have evolved together to be a symbiotic or helpful relationship to both. And so they are in that regard, they are archetypes. And they also are, there's a cool word, you probably have run into it, but there's a cool word. It's the word psychopomp. Do you know this? And a psychopomp is a guardian and a guide to the underworld or to the unconscious. And this is echoed in many myths. And the one that springs to mind, of course, is the dog Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards the underworld in Greek mythology. But they are guardians and guides. They will show us a way in the unconscious. So that's one thing that occurred to me. And in my original reading of your dream, I didn't know that the dog was a female, because the dog later humps the lion. So I was leaping to the conclusion that it was a male dog. It's a female dog. You think it's a female dog, and it represents the anima for you. Now, say another word or two about what is the anima in a man's psyche.
Yes, so the anima is it's the unconscious feminine aspect of my cisgender male ego. And yeah, the more I sort of dig into my dreams, the more I recognize that for me, the unconscious is I think it's mostly female. It's almost like the yin yang,
Yes.
for me, like soul is all consciousness. It's the sun. And so really it's my understanding of this is beginning to just, it's like almost like it just, for me, the unconscious is the anima. So yeah, that's kind of how I view that. And so the trick is to connect more to that, that aspect is really important. So I'm an ENTP, and a lot of these, so a lot of the dreams that I'm having and stuff, it's all about this integration of the anima and to try to make the unconscious conscious.
That is an excellent, for me, description. If it's okay with you, I'd like to add something.
Sure.
In my education, the female or anima aspect in a man's psyche does have to do with relatedness, how to relate, certainly in our outer life, relate to a romantic partner or spouse, to relate to friends, to relate to children, to relate to our pets or to our neighbors or our colleagues, just how to get along relationally in the world, so to speak. At least that's one of her jobs. And when we're not in right relation to that aspect of ourselves, it can appear dark and give us a lot of difficulty, So, and then when in right relation, it shifts to being very helpful. And so that's an idea to play around with, is that, among other things, the job of the anima in a man's psyche is to facilitate relatedness, and relatedness to within, to these complexes within. How do I, from the ego stance, how do I relate to this, all of this business? So that's an idea to play around with, I think. So there's that. Okay. I think this dynamic between the dog and the lion, and it's interesting, it's a mountain lion. The dog and the lion, this interplay between these two is quite archetypal. Tell me more about the lion. You equated it with the sun, while the dog is equated with me. By the way, are you familiar at all with the Rider-Waite tarot deck?
Yeah. I just actually bought one, and I've been dipping into it a little bit.
Well, Luna has got two dogs in it. I mean, the
Ah,
moon,
mhm.
the major arcana card that's the moon has these two dogs in it, which, you know, when you said that, it just jumped to mind. So now we're talking about the lion. Tell me some more about that and what that is for you.
So the lion, I think the lion, it, the, so I think for me, so I'm a Leo, and
Huh.
I know it's a mountain lion, but I think the fact that it's a mountain lion really just is sort of part of my kind of individual psyche, that I'm from the Western United States. I'm from the desert. So there's a lot of symbolism, I think, that plays into that, the way I'm dreaming about this stuff. But even still, I do equate the mountain lion just with the lion energy. And the lion it's really representative, I think, of the conscious dominant in my life. So meaning in other words, I guess I would say that the ego is kind of, it would be the lion, right? The sun, the it's just the way I relate to the world. It's the masculine aspect of my cisgender male ego. That's how I relate to the lion.
I think this is brilliant. I think this is just brilliant. Your take on this as something from the unconscious affiliated with all of this is now coming to the fore, so to speak, is
Hmm.
coming into consciousness. And in fact, at least for a minute, it needs to kind of take over, perhaps, or at least that's kind of what it looks like. You know, that is, oh man, that is brilliant stuff. Dreams are great, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. Having the dreams, reading Conjunctionis, and anything else really I can get my hands on. I just love comparing these images to the alchemy, because I feel like it just opens up this huge
Oh
sort of
yeah.
store of knowledge. So yeah, I'm so excited about it. It's like, I wrote this book and it's amazing. I do these seminars and people want to talk about my book, and honestly, I'm like, let's talk about dreams. And it's funny too, because I was really hesitant to look at my dreams for a long time, until right after I finished the book. I was like, okay, I got to do this now. Yeah, that's how I relate to the lion. So the lion is also the king, right? The king and the queen, and the
Hmm.
lion is the sun and soul. And that imagery plays out in Conjunctionis as well, right? And what's taking place between the sun and the moon during the eclipse, what it produces is it produces a child. The
Right.
and the alchemists called it the filius, so the filius mercurius. And then that's how I relate to the man that all of a sudden is standing there, and
Right.
I see him as a newcomer in AA. So this is a new sort of a new, I don't know, it's an interesting figure. It's the child that comes out of this conjunction of the sun and the moon, or Sol and Luna.
That is just brilliant. I don't want to skip over the fact that throughout the dream, even before the the real confrontation, the real fight takes place, that the dog follows you around and you actually relate to it. You pet it. It's kind of, hey, the dog is like, hey, I'm on your team. I'm here for you, kind of feeling to it. At least that's the feeling I got.
That is interesting too, because also, like, just personally, like, I'm like frightened of pit bulls. So there was like, as the dog was following me in the dream, like the feeling was that, like, oh, but then when the dog like got next to me, I felt comfortable. I was really comfortable with the dog. And then I was actually, when the lion came up and the dog started growling at the lion, I was like grateful that the dog was there and like was sort of protecting me,
Yes.
which was an interesting, I think it is an interesting, like, in terms of this kind of the unconscious and the conscious and stuff. um
Hmm.
there's yeah it's a nice relief to be able to rely on the anima or the unconscious a little bit, rather
Hmm.
than be kind of afraid of it.
Precisely. But, and I will say this though, I think that in addition to the willingness that you talk about at the end of the dream, the idea of, a little healthy wariness of the unconscious is also probably a good idea. Yeah,
Mhm.
to that, let's see, what am I trying to say? That a healthy respect, that's what it is. A healthy respect for the processes of the unconscious is what is often called for. In other words, to run willy-nilly without a strong enough ego stance.
Mm.
Yes, the ego does frequently need to be sort of shaved down a little bit. And we still need enough ego strength, though, to mediate between all of these forces and our own waking life so we don't get too overwhelmed. So I think that fear, that little bit of concern, if you will, at the beginning is well warranted. So that's just another idea to kind of
Yeah.
think about and talk about. So, and this is a gradual relationship that you're building up with this dog. I mean, it's a little bit of petting over here and a little bit of petting over there, and then, and it's interesting, the owner, the self, allows them to kind of fight it out. That,
Yeah.
what a great touch. I want to go back to what you just said a moment ago, which was when this happens, this integration happens, then a child comes. There is a product of creativity, if you will, right? And you just called it, I'm curious. Is
Mm.
that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, that's an important name in the world of alchemy. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So I am I am just completely blown away by the idea of Mercurius because my relationship to Mercurius is through the archetype of the alcoholic. And so when I kind of dreamed up the archetype of the alcoholic, I wrote chapter 11 in my book regarding the connection between the alcoholic and the trickster. Because what happens with the trickster is that the trickster sort of goes out and just bumbles his way into all sorts of troubles, and he's you know it, definitely intoxicated when he can be, just he's big trouble. But then the trickster is lucky enough, I guess, to sort of stumble into this transformation, and the trickster then becomes the shaman. And so the trickster shaman is sort of the pair, the archetypal pair, right? So a lot of archetypes come in pairs. There's a lower and a higher aspect. But in terms of Mercurius, Mercurius is a duplex, meaning that it sort of maintains the same semblance. It's wearing the same costume in both its lower and its higher aspect. So in alchemy, Jung's always talking about Mercurius as sort of it's almost like a symbol of the self in the way that it encompasses the lowest and the highest. So, you know, there's a lot of alchemical symbols that do that, like sulfur is one. Almost all of them do, really. So my understanding of Mercurius though is I just really can just equate Mercurius to the alcoholic, because the practicing alcoholic is in a lot of trouble, but the sober alcoholic is sort of like has experienced this change and is almost like a shaman. And this is an interesting concept, I guess, because I haven't read anywhere else about the archetype of the alcoholic. Somebody told me that another person had written about it, but I don't, like, the Jungians I've asked haven't ever seen it before. But there's the connection that I'm making between the alcoholic and Mercurius. I don't know that whether it works for like the world at large, but it certainly is a connection in my own psyche, right? So
Yeah.
in the so the birth of this sort of newcomer in AA in this dream, I think is really, I think it's indicative of the emergence of the archetype of the alcoholic. Um, even if it's so much as like that it came out in my book this way, that this sort of conjunction of Sol and Luna had already taken place, or it was taking place, and what emerged was the archetype of the alcoholic, or if whether, you know, in terms of the dream sequence, that the way I feel about it now is that this newcomer in AA that emerges in the dream is actually Mercurius. And I don't know if that makes sense. That
Oh,
it's hard
yeah.
to talk about this stuff because it's so, it's just so symbolic, So
What is astonishing to me is that this concept hasn't really, you said maybe one other person has written about this, but as soon as I saw that even the words archetype of the alcoholic, I went, well, of course, because this is an experience of human beings from before time. I mean, from you know early written history. You've got there are no there are references to people who could not stop drinking wine, couldn't do it. And so this is part and parcel of the human experience around the world and through time. And for me, that is part of the definition of what an archetype is. It
yeah,
is, and and the potential for this, whether it's visible or not, but the potential for alcoholism is inside of us all. No
mm,
matter, I mean, I read somewhere that even if you don't have alcoholism in your family, or if nothing happened, in your if you drink every day long enough, you'll become an alcoholic, period. I mean, the potential for this is always there. Therefore, it is a basic pattern of human behavior.
sure.
And how this has not been explored heretofore is beyond me. So I'm I'm so happy that you did this, because I think this is going to become an important element in our relationship to folks that are really struggling, you know? So
Yeah,
this is
I appreciate that.
yeah, this is good. This is very important stuff. So okay, I'm with you. This is him. This is Mercurius. And then the dream ends on this wonderful reminder to you and the whole world, if you will, about willingness. And
Mm,
so do you mind saying what that is, that quote from the big book again? Or
sure.
that's mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I woke up to the well-known phrase from the book Alcoholics Anonymous in my mind: willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but of these, willingness is indispensable.
So that is the motto that we can all adopt, I think, if we need to transform. And we all, at some level, at some point in our lives, we need to transform. And we need those essentials of willingness, honesty, and especially self-honesty. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. That's just brilliant as all get out. Okay. So here's a question that I have for all the folks I work with. What have you done, if anything? I mean, you wrote the book, then you start having dreams like this. What have you done in particular to honor this dream?
Okay, so I love that question. You know, I feel really blessed because for me, I am able to get up in the morning and spend like up to 2 hours just kind of journaling and like writing. And so what I've done with this dream in particular is I'm hoping to get this dream published in the Jung Journal out of San Francisco. So I've submitted it, and I'm awaiting their sort of response to see whether they'll publish it or not. And the other thing that I'm doing to honor this dream, which I'm, and I just encourage people to do is I'm discovering that in my own psyche, in my dream world, there's an epic adventure taking place, and that these characters that are, that kind of accompany me in my dreams, they are themselves undergoing these huge transformations. And so my job is to, I feel sort of obligated, and I'm honored to do it, is to just give them as much form as I can in consciousness, and to write about it, and to, sometimes I'll make sketches of different dream images and stuff, and really try to connect the dots to bring these things into consciousness. There's this really strange correlation, that on one hand, it looks like we kind of look at these dreams and it's like, oh, what is this? Who cares if, there was a conjunction of the sun and the moon in your dream world? Like, but what I feel like for me, what the dreams are really trying to tell me is that there's these really deep transformations taking place in the background of my psyche,
Yes.
and that the dreams are the evidence of these transformations, right? So,
Yeah.
and that in my world out here, my waking world, there's a lot of evidence that a change is occurring. Like what you said, I loved what you said about the relationships, right? My relationships are changing. My relationship with my wife is changing. My relationship with my parents is changing. It's that one's more on kind of the sad side.
Mm.
They struggle with addiction and alcoholism, and so, it's that's not a happy ending relationship or whatever, but at least there's a level of consciousness there now on my part, and just my relationship to the world in general is changing so much. So there's a strange correlation between the unconscious and consciousness, and I think the
Yeah.
dream tell that story. I'm just blown away by dream work, to be honest. It's just so moving.
Yes. Yes. So I have one little suggestion about honoring the dream.
Okay.
And it really goes back to the other dream that you referenced, and that is the jack-o'-lantern dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll show you something in just a second, but
Okay.
would you be willing to find an object that would be a little pumpkin or a little jack-o'-lantern? Might be hard to find one this time of year. They come out like crazy at Halloween, but to
Yeah.
find a small one that might be already rigged up with a little light inside, or get you a candle to put, get a permanent one, one, and or put a candle inside of one, and just keep it near you.
Hmm.
Just have it. And I will show you something right quick. So when I was a teenager, which was a very long time ago, I had a very significant dream, a numinous dream that included eggs.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, might not be able to see them. Those eggs. They're eggs. I know it's hard to see, but it's 4 eggs. And that image, if it's okay with you, you sent me an image that you also dreamed of a quad like that,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
but it had skulls in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, may I comment on that for a moment?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So, you mentioned a moment ago that you are an, did you say an ENTP?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the 4 letters ENTP are a reference to Jung's typology theory: extroversion versus introversion, intuitiveness versus sensate, thinking versus feeling. And then 2 other folks came along, Myers and Briggs came along and added the P and the J. ENTP. Okay. So what's interesting about this is that and that are what we present with. I happen to be a INTJ. And so I'm right with you. And but whatever we feel like is well developed in us, our intuitive aspect and our thinking function are the well developed aspect. The lesser developed aspect then is the sensate and the feeling. Now we've got them, but this is our right hand, this is our left hand. If we're right-handed, this is our dominant. This is where this feels natural, easy. These two, not so much. Or when these fail, then we sometimes go here, but we don't do it very well. And so what's interesting is to think about that in a quaternity like that. Now, and I think this is true for both of us because of this and this. Okay. I think that our way to, if we get stuck down here, when things are going poorly and we get stuck down here, and by the way, alcoholics get stuck there a lot, but our way out, our way back up into our better fun, our job is to develop these two in a conscious way. Our job is to develop our other side, especially in second half of life. This has served us well in the first half of life, and now our job is to do this. But while it's still undeveloped, our way back is through this function right here. Because our intuitive is our strongest, our thinking is our secondary, I think, for both of us. But this is where we really, and our feeling function doesn't necessarily have to do with emotion. It has to do with values. How we evaluate things. You know, our thinking function is really rational. It's 2 + 2 = 4. Our feeling function says 2 + 2 may equal 4, but you know what? I'm going to go with 7. Because 7's more important. I mean, something like that. Does that make sense? So whenever I see a grid like that, like the one that presented in your dream, I think about this whole idea and the fact that you even mentioned it today. I said, okay, I'm going to go with that. All right. The second thing is the images were skulls, right? Okay. So tell me what you think that was all about.
So I did a lot of, so I think that the skulls, if I was to look at this from sort of just an alchemical perspective,
yeah,
I mean, the skulls, they have so much meaning, right? But I think in terms of this dream, that the skulls, I kind of did a lot of like, so I'll just tell you what I was thinking, which is very interesting in terms of the graph that you just drew. So the skulls are laying on the ground, and there's 4 skulls, but they were actually facing west. So they were facing towards the N and the S. And then it occurred to me that as I kind of looked at the image, I thought, you know what? The skulls are probably looking at the pumpkin. The skulls are watching this sunset. And so then the skulls are actually facing southwest. And so they're facing towards the sensation function. They're facing directly into the unconscious. And what they're actually seeing is the cross, and the cross is red. And so what they're witnessing then is they're sort of looking into a mirror. And I guess this sort of abstract symbolism is that the image that they're looking in a mirror is the cross, and the cross is actually taking place inside of the skulls. So what the image that sort of emerges, I guess, is the squaring of the circle. And interestingly too, the skull was a symbol of the vase, or the hermetic vessel where the image takes place. or where the alchemical work takes place. To me, that kind of all fit, and it made sense that this is what was happening. And I think that ties into the next dream too, that where the woman, there's this female figure she ends up being dissolved in a hermetically sealed plastic
Yep.
container. So I think that too kind of points to this too. The thing about this dream image was that I don't know any of the information around it. It was just this image that stuck with me. So yeah, the image of the skulls. So I
Uh-huh.
don't, you know, so I have to kind of conjecture a lot, but that's where I've sort of settled with the skulls. I don't know. What do you think about the skull symbolism?
I've got one thing that leaps to mind is that grid of the four.
Mm-hmm.
4 was a very important number to Jung. It was the symbol for wholeness.
Yeah.
And if there were 4 of anything, that looked whole. If there was one short, then that was on the way to being whole. Like, for instance, if you found 3 quarters in your pocket, that was 3, but the 4th quarter would make the dollar, But
Right.
the fact that there were 4 of them, 4, and here it is, it seems significant. It
Mm-hmm.
it seems, and their layout seems significant. As you indicated, there's a cross in the middle of this, the upper tied to the lower, right? And
Yeah.
the left and the right tied together, and the thing in the middle. It's interesting how many Christian churches have adopted that circle with that cross in the middle. If you just start noticing, they're everywhere. Anyway,
Hmm.
also the skulls in art, in Renaissance art, a motif that shows up is a picture of Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was a friend of Jesus, and she gets mixed up with the prostitute who bathed Jesus's feet with her tears and dried Jesus's feet with her hair. She got conflated with that. So she is seen in Renaissance art as the repentant sinner, if you will.
Hmm.
But in many depictions of her, there is a skull. She's often
Hmm.
looking in a mirror. There's a candle nearby. I mean, this is a motif over and over and over again. And there's
Hmm.
a candle nearby, and she's got her hand on a skull. And the
Hmm.
idea of a skull is that it's a memento mori. That term, memento mori, that means remember you die.
Hmm.
It's a uh, reminder that we're mortals, that we're mortal folks, that kind of idea. Also, for me, it also touches on the fact that in our psychic life, there are deaths and resurrections throughout our life.
Mm-hmm.
That the ego, if you will, is crucified,
Hmm.
and spends a few days in hell, but then is always resurrected, transformed
Yeah.
over and over and over again. And so this is a reminder not only of our physical short time on earth, but the idea that, remember, the ego has to get shaved down every so often. We just have to remember that. And in a weird twist, that word mori, which is Latin for it's a verb for death, like mortuary and mortician and things like that. That is my maiden name.
Hmm.
That's my maiden name. So anyway, those are my thoughts about skulls and the 4 and the balance of the how they were presented in the image, because they could
Yeah.
have been presented in a straight line or just scattered around, but they were placed, I think, very carefully. So
Right.
that's just kind of my idea about that.
Love
um
it. There's one quote too. I have right here. It says, this is Jung. He says, the moment of the eclipse and mystic marriage is death on the cross.
There it
And
is.
yeah, and so that statement helped me to tie this image into the previous dreams of the eclipse and then the dog humping the lion.
Yes.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I love it. I'm
Uh,
always, yeah, always open-minded about, the big question is like, what am I missing? Right?
Not to worry, you'll get another dream.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
Cody, do you think we got someplace today? Do you think we got anywhere?
Yeah, I
Was,
do. It's been
was
great.
this helpful to you?
It really was. Yeah. It adds some new texture and some new nuance to the images. And yeah, you pointed out some things that I, hadn't really considered. And so I love it.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
so glad. I'm so glad. Well, I really thank you for sharing your dream with me, all these dreams with me today, and being willing to, you know, have this recorded. And I hope it'll be of use to other folks. I really hope that your folks will buy your book and that it will be a blessing to others. I'm suggesting it to all of my colleagues, and as a way to just deepen our understanding of working with folks with these easily identifiable addictions, if not our own, that are not so easily identifiable.
Mm, yeah.